I recently came across an article by Nick Hanauer and Eric Liu entitled "Libertarians are the New Communists." And I found it to be so full of bullshit that I wanted to do something about it, and I thought to myself, what's the internet for? So the article reads, most people would consider radical libertarianism and communism polar opposites. The first glorifies personal freedom, the second would obliterate it. Yet the ideologies are simply mirror images. Both attempt to answer the same question and fail to do so in similar ways. Where communism was adopted, the result was misery, poverty, and tyranny. If extremist libertarians ever translated their beliefs into policy, it would lead to the same kind of catastrophe. Alright, so notice how these guys use the word radical and extremist to poison the well. I guess if you recognize the universality of a principle, that makes you an extremist. Like, if you say murder is wrong, you recognize that to be a moral principle, meaning it needs to be, if it's a principle, it applies across the board. And if you think that, I guess you're a anti-murder extremist, or radical, or whatever they want to call it. So it continues. Let's start with some definitions. By radical libertarianism, we mean the ideology that holds that individual liberties trumps all other values. I love the language here. By communism, we mean the ideology of extreme state domination of private and economic life. So I guess those who believe that the principle each individual owns his or herself, if you believe that to be a universal principle, then you're just a radical libertarian. But what meaning would that statement have if it was not universal? Then, I mean, would it make sense to say that you own yourself, except when someone else says you don't? Then you really wouldn't own yourself. The authors here, they obviously don't believe in self-ownership as a universal principle. I mean, if someone else is entitled to make decisions over yourself, if you believe that each individual owns his or herself, then that means that your ownership of yourself supersedes any other claim of ownership that anybody else makes. I guess if you believe that, you're just a radical libertarian extremist. Alright, so then they say, some of that radical libertarians are Ayn Rand fans who divide their fellow citizens into makers in the mold of John Galt and takers in the mold of anyone who's not John Galt. Well, I really hope for the authors that they've never read Ayn Rand, which would make them charlatans if they never read her and talk about her with authority as they do. But the other possibility is even worse, which is that they have read Ayn Rand. Well, there's actually two more possibilities. That they've read her and are willingly misinterpreting her, and that would make them liars. Or that they read her and they just didn't understand what she was trying to say, I guess, is the third possibility here. For Rand, makers are those who create, those who produce. John Galt was not the only maker in Atlas Shrugged. I mean, you don't have to be, you don't have to create Apple or Microsoft to be a maker. I mean, if you work at a convenience store, I mean, you're still, producing, you're still creating value for someone else, and then you would be a maker. Takers are those who use violent means or the threat of violence to appropriate someone else's production. So to say that John Galt-like people are makers and all of the rest are takers, and just a gross misinterpretation of Ayn Rand. So either they, like I said, didn't read her, or they read her and they're just trying to confuse you with that. My guess is they haven't even read her. So it continues. Some, such as the Koch brothers, are economic royalists who repackage trickle-down economics as libertarian populism. Repackage, is libertarianism a veiled ideology or philosophy that needs to be repackaged. I mean, last time I checked, no one's discredited libertarianism with any logical consistency. And since they're talking about economics, no economic school of thought is more akin to libertarianism than Austrian economics, which is not the same as libertarianism, where libertarians would say government is morally wrong and personal freedom is morally correct. Austrian economists would say government is inefficient and free markets are efficient. So they're not the same, but they go together real well. So Austrian economists have never been, or the school of thought has never been disproven. As a matter of fact, Austrian economists continue to be right when everybody else continues to be wrong. How many times have I heard, no one could have predicted the housing bubble? Well, that's right, no one could have, unless they were Austrian economists. Peter Schiff was all over the news warning everybody about this, and all he got was laughs. And on the other side of the equation, you get this Nobel Prize winner of economics, what's his name? Paul Krugman. He had no clue, and yet he continues to be, a mainstream economist that everybody looks up to. And just because he's a Nobel Prize winner doesn't make him a authority in subject. Where I'm from, I was going to say a lady, but there's a woman who won a Peace Nobel Prize. And she's as much a peacemaker as Obama is. But, Obama's also a Nobel Peace Prize winner. So that's how much Nobel Prizes are worth. Alright, so then they say, some are followers of Texas Senator Ted Cruz, whose highest aspiration is to shut down government. Some resemble the anti-tax activist Grover Norquist, who has made a career out of trying to down, stifle, and strangle government. Yes, liberty is a core American value, and overweening the state can be unhealthy. Well, and there are plenty of self-described libertarians who have adopted the label mainly because they support same-sex marriage or decry government surveillance. The social libertarians are not the problem. It's the nihilist, anti-state libertarians of the Koch, Cruz, Norquist, Paul, Ron and Rand alike school who should worry us. So I'm guessing Mr. Hanauer and Mr. Liu are against government surveillance. Some should probably write about them, calling them radical freedom extremists that don't want government surveilling them. They don't know freedom is great, except, of course, when you have to give up your freedom for security. And that's why government surveillance is so good. But this Mr. Hanauer and Mr. Liu are such radical extremists that they don't want government surveilling us. So that's all you have to do is just when you want to criticize someone's position based on this sort of bullshit, all you have to do is just move the bar so that it fits your argument or lack thereof. Yeah. For example, you could say, man, Johnny really likes extreme cold weather. He likes the low 30s. So you just call the low 30s extreme, and then Johnny loves extreme cold weather. But you could, describe the same exact situation by saying, Johnny wouldn't make it in a northern Norway winter where temperatures are easily in the low teens. The coldest he likes is the 30s. So now extreme weather is way below 30, and now Johnny is a guy who can't take, cold weather. Same exact situation, but you can call him an extreme weather lover or not, depending on what fits your argument. In this case, the authors here are calling libertarians extremists. That's where they place arbitrarily the bar of extremism. So let's see. So they continue on. Like communism, this philosophy is defective in its misreading of human nature, misunderstanding of how societies work, and utter failure to adapt to changing circumstances. Radical libertarians assume that humans are wired only to be selfish, when in fact cooperation is the height of human evolution. I don't know any libertarian who's against cooperation. I've never heard of one, really, and if I did, I don't know if I would consider that person a libertarian. And libertarians are not selfish either. Not as a philosophy. Libertarian is not intrinsically selfish, as in harming others to profit or profiting at the expense of someone else. Ayn Rand would call those takers. Libertarians are not takers. Libertarians would define, I guess if you define selfishness as acting in your own interest, then I guess libertarians are selfish that way. Although that's definitely not the way the authors mean. That's not what they want. That's not what they mean when they use the word selfish here. It's definitely derogatory or negative. In reality, if we think that selfishness, if we define selfishness as acting in your own personal interest, then it's not so bad. So if I sell my TV because I need cash, then I'm not necessarily, I'm not Mother Teresa or making the TV available to someone who wants it. It's not because I'm such a good person that I'm going to sell my TV to someone who wants it, can have it. No, I want cash, so I'm going to sell it. So I sell TV as a selfish act, sure, why not? Out of self-interest. But in that case, my self-interest coincided with someone else's self-interest or selfishness. Someone who wanted my TV and was willing to give me money for it. And not necessarily that person would give me money for my TV because he loves humanity and he wanted to show it by giving me his money. No, he wanted the TV and he had the cash and he paid me for it. And that's that. There's no... it's just two selfish actions here coming together, cooperating, or two people acting selfishly and cooperating to achieve their own end. But the authors here portray this as if selfishness and cooperation are polar opposites, which they're obviously not. Selfishness, as they would define it, to feed their article or their beliefs, would have to be some sort of stubbornness or self-absorbed behavior and reluctance to relate to others, and that's not libertarians at all. Portraying libertarians as people with that kind of selfish behavior is just incredibly ignorant at best, and it's misleading and evil at worst. Alright, so then they go on to say, it meaning libertarianism, it assumes that societies are efficient mechanisms requiring no rules or enforcers. I never met a libertarian who is against rules or enforcers. It's not about being against the rules. I'm a libertarian, and if I go to college, I accept the rules and I abide by them, and I accept their authorities and how they enforce the rules. If not, I just drop school or whatever. Same if I take a job. If my boss is an asshole, I can always quit it. But try to quit government, see how that goes. So, just because you don't like government doesn't mean you don't like rules and enforcers. Just because I don't like your cone with frozen shit on top of it, it doesn't mean I don't like ice cream. If I don't like your shit ice cream, it doesn't mean I don't like any ice cream. Well, the difference is, with government, you can't say no to that shit ice cream. You get to eat it whether you want it or not. If in school or with a job, you can always say no, thank you. Because with government, you don't really own yourself, do you? Alright, so then they say, when in fact they are fragile ecosystems. They meaning societies. So when in fact they are fragile ecosystems prone to collapse and easily overwhelmed by free riders. Ooh, government, please save us from ourselves. We are so bad, we need you to save us. And it is fanatically rigid. I love this part. It is fanatically rigid in its insistence on a single solution to every problem. Roll back the state. You know who else is fanatically rigid about their insistence about a single solution? On a single solution, it's people who are being held against their will. Like if you've been kidnapped. The same solution applies to all your problems, I guess. If you're being kidnapped, if you're hungry, then you would probably think, if I were free, I would just go eat. Or if I'm bored, I would go to the movies if I were free. But I'm being held hostage or kidnapped here. If I'm uncomfortable, I would probably just remove the knotted ropes around my wrists if I were free. Or I wouldn't even have them to begin with. So yeah, these people who are kidnapped, they're just fanatically rigid about wanting to be freed, all their solutions are the same, just they want their freedom from their captors. Such idiots, right? Alright. Communism failed in 3 strikingly similar ways. It believed that humans should be willing cogs serving the proletariat. It assumed that societies could be run top-down like machines, and it too was fanatically rigid in its insistence of an all-encompassing ideology, leading to totalitarianism. Radical libertarianism, if ever put into practice at the scale of something bigger than a tiny enclave, would also be a disaster. We say the conditional would because radical libertarianism has a fatal flaw. It can't be applied across a functioning society. What might radical libertarians do if they actually had power? President Paul would rule by tantrum, shutting down the government in order to repeal laws already passed by Congress. Sure, because, President Bush and President Obama, they've never ruled by tantrums, have they? Now, I don't know what minarchists would have to say about this, but anarchists would not use government as means to achieve freedom, I don't think. That would be like saying, I hate guns, so I'm going to point you and shoot you if you don't relinquish your guns. I'm going to shoot at everybody who don't want to relinquish guns because I hate guns. That's what using government to achieve anarchy is. And as much as I admire Dr. Paul, he's no anarchist anyway. Alright, so a Secretary Norquist would eliminate the Internal Revenue Service and progressive taxation. That'd be nice. So that already wealthy could exponentially compound their advantage, as the programs that sustain the prosperous middle class are gutted. A Koch domestic policy would obliterate environmental standards for clean air and water, so that polluters could externalize their cost onto other people. Right, because the only way of fighting pollution is the government, right? Radical libertarians would be great at destroying. They would have little concept of creating or governing. Then they say, it is in failed states such as Somalia that libertarianism finds its fullest actual expression. And there's the Somalia argument. But let's go back to this destroying thing, that radical libertarians would only be great at destroying. Because they say this because they would shut down the government, but that's like saying that because a surgeon removed the tumor, then all that surgeon is good at is taking stuff off of your body, which is insane and ridiculous. And then there's that Somalia example. You can say definitely that there's no state in Somalia, and that they're doing pretty bad because they are, and it's not a nice place, I guess. But was it doing great when they had a state? Was Somalia this beautiful economic paradise when they had a state? No, right? I mean, it was also a pretty nasty place. As a matter of fact, infant mortality rates, maternal mortality rates have gone down over the past decade or so in Somalia. Life expectancy, literacy, purchasing power, exports and imports, cell phones per capita even have all gone up over the last decade in Somalia. I mean, they're still doing really bad, but at least it's getting better. Is that proof that no state is better than state? Not really, but they're indicators. All right. But saying Somalia is in bad shape because they have no state is kind of like saying that if you go to a doctor because you have a cold, and when you get back, someone says, this goes to show you should never go to the doctor. You go to the doctor and then you come back with a cold. Wouldn't you think it would be relevant to know if you had a cold before you went to the doctor? The same way it would probably be relevant to know if Somalia was doing bad before their government collapsed. Apparently for these authors here, that's not really relevant information. All they see is Somalia, bad, no state. Well, that goes to show you no state is bad. Pretty childish logic there, or lack thereof. So then they go on. Some libertarians will claim we are arguing against a strawman, and that no serious adherent of this philosophy advocates these extreme positions we describe. Well, that's clever, but that's not nice at all. They're shedding light to this strawman that they're not committing. That they say some might accuse us of attacking a strawman, saying because no one really believes these ideas. Now I know for a fact that people do believe in libertarianism, because I am one of them. I would, I'm against the state. I'm against taxes. So yeah, they're not committing that strawman, I'm sure. But by shedding light in that strawman they're not committing, they're distancing themselves from the strawman that they are committing, which is the gross mischaracterization of libertarianism. All over this article, you can see that they're attacking a strawman, and it's so obvious, but they use this paragraph here to try to distance themselves from any strawman that they might be committing. Alright, the public record of extreme statements, extreme here, extreme there, everything extreme, if it's not what they believe. The public record of extreme statements by the likes of Cruz, Norquist, and DePauls speaks for itself. Reasonable people debate how best to regulate, or how government can most efficiently do its work, not whether to regulate at all, or whether government should even exist. Right, because reasonable people debate how long someone should be held captive by a kidnapper. Unreasonable people would debate that there should be no kidnapping at all. Reasonable people, they know that that's extreme. I mean, that's anti-kidnapping extremism. Reasonable people would just debate, how long should you be held captive if you're kidnapped? That makes a lot of sense. If you're not reasonable, you're just extremist. Alright, so the alternative to this extremism, there it is again, is an evolving blend of freedom and cooperation. And there's that false dichotomy again, freedom and cooperation. Libertarians don't see freedom as a polar opposite to cooperation. As a matter of fact, cooperation is very important in a libertarian, or would be very important in a libertarian society. Just like I said before, just a single purchase or sale purchase activity is cooperation. There's nothing wrong with that from the libertarian perspective, but they continue to portray this as as if libertarians believe that freedom and cooperation are just polar opposites. Anyway, the relationship between social happiness, whatever that means, social happiness, society is happy. All right, good for society. I don't know anyone called society, but good for her. The relationship between social happiness and economic success can be plotted on a bell curve, and the sweet spot is away from the extremes, right, of either pure liberty or pure communitarism. That is where true citizenship and healthy capitalism are found. So they conclude this without presenting any proof, except for the Somalia bit, which is just wrong. So let's see. The sweet spot is away from the extremes. Sure, I mean, you don't want someone to be held against his will for life. You don't want someone to be kidnapped all of his or her life, but you don't want no kidnaps at all either. I mean, the extremes are just wrong. Pure goodness is somewhere in the middle of this beautiful bell curve. So if you plot the curve here, you'll find out that some kidnapping is good, because it's not extremist. It's not complete kidnapping or no kidnapping at all. Those are just extremes, and who wants that, right? Radical extremists might want it, but not rational people. Alright, so true citizenship enables a society to thrive for precisely the reasons that communism and radical libertarianism cannot. It's based on a realistic conception of human nature that recognizes we must cooperate to be able to compete at higher levels. Well, I guess they think if they say this enough, people will think it's true that libertarians despise cooperation. But they're not committing a straw man, of course. They already said that earlier. True citizenship means changing policy to adapt to changes in circumstance. Sometimes, libertarians never adapt to changes in circumstance. Yep. No one out of government ever had success in a changing environment, for sure. Sometimes government isn't the answer. Other times it is. Right, kidnapping is not always the answer. Just sometimes. If the U.S. is to continue to adapt and evolve, we have to see that freedom isn't simply the removal of encumbrance, or the ability to ignore inconvenient rules or limitations. Freedom is responsibility. Communism failed because it kept citizens from taking responsibility for governing themselves. By preaching individualism above else, so does radical libertarianism. It is one thing to oppose intrusive government, surveillance, or the overreach of federal programs. It's another to call for the evisceration of government itself. Let's put radical libertarianism into the dustbin of history, along with its cousin communism. So it is one thing to oppose intrusive government surveillance or the overreach of federal programs. It's another to call for the evisceration of government itself. All right, so yeah, it's one thing to be against people being held kidnapped for too long, but it's something different completely to call against kidnapping altogether. I mean, it makes sense if you don't want people to be kidnapped forever. That's perfectly understandable. But if you don't want kidnaps at all, then that's just an absurd position. That's not reasonable. So if you are in any way against any form of violent intervention in your life by government, you might just be a radical extremist libertarian.